and welcome to this Homecrafts video. Today I'll be showing you how you can create your own photo stencil screens for screen printing at home. The key components for this process are a screen printing screen and some photo stencil emulsion and sensitizer. But I'll also be using two different kinds of screen printing ink, one for textiles and one for paper and card. A sheet of acetate. I'll also need a permanent marker, a squeegee, a rubber kidney, some acrylic sheeting, black card, and I'll be using a portable exposure unit like this. The first thing you'll need to do is prepare your screens. Take your bottle of sensitizer and fill it about half full with warm water. You then need to pour the entire contents of the sensitizer into the emulsion, so replace the cap and shake before pouring into the larger tub of emulsion mixture. Once you've added all the sensitizer, stir thoroughly, but try not to make any bubbles. You'll need to leave that to stand for about 24 hours to settle. Once your emulsion's had 24 hours to settle, you'll need to coat your screens. I'll be using a coating trough like this. The first thing you need to do is pour the emulsion into the trough. Hold your screen so that the smooth surface is facing towards the trough, and take the coating trough in your other hand. Tilt the trough forwards to bring the emulsion to the front and place firmly against the screen. Then in a single motion, draw the trough up to the top of the screen, coating with emulsion as you go. Once your screen's been covered using the coating trough, return any excess emulsion to the emulsion pot. You can always reuse this for a different screen. The goal at this stage is to get a perfectly even and very thin finish of emulsion over the surface of the mesh on your screen. I'll be using a squeegee to make sure that my coating of emulsion is thin and even. By drawing the squeegee over the surface of the mesh, I'll be removing excess emulsion. This process needs to be repeated on both sides of the mesh. Keep rotating your screen and keep working until you find that no more emulsion is pushed through the mesh to the other side. When you're finished, your screen should be covered perfectly evenly and smoothly with no dribbles or lumps. This needs to be placed in a warm, dry and dark place to dry out completely. If you don't have a coating trough to hand, you can always use a rubber kidney or a squeegee. The principle's the same, just slightly more work. You'll need to scoop the emulsion out of the container with your kidney and draw it up the screen, covering the entire surface with a thin layer of emulsion. Whether you're using a coating trough, a squeegee or a rubber kidney, the end result should be the same. Your mesh needs to have a smooth, even coating of emulsion. It's worth writing a mixing date on your pot of emulsion because it does have a working shelf life of about 4 to 6 weeks once it's been mixed. While the emulsion on my screen is drying, I'll need to prepare the stencil or the template for my screen. I'll be using a sheet of acetate, a permanent marker, and a sketch or a printout of a design that I'm planning to transfer onto my screen. Any sections which you colour in black on your final screen will allow the ink to travel through. This means that you need to have the black as dark and impenetrable as possible for the exposure process. Once you've finished tracing and colouring your design, turn the acetate over and repeat the whole process on the reverse. Once you've coloured both sides of your acetate, hold it up to a window or to a light source to make sure that there are no parts which you haven't coloured. Once you're happy with the coverage of the permanent marker, you're ready to expose your screen. If If you haven't used your exposure unit or your other light source for some time, or if you're doing a particularly intricate design for your screens, it's always worth making a test strip. The test strip is what will tell you exactly which exposure time will work best for your design and your screen. The test strip is conducted using your exposure unit or light source and a piece of dark paper which will prevent any reflection from the surface. Place your dried screen with the flat side down, followed by your design, and cover with a clean piece of an acrylic sheet. You'll then need to cover most of your screen with another piece of black card. Make sure you have a small amount of your design exposed. Cover with your exposure unit or light source. Turn on and time, normally about 2 to 4 minutes per section of exposure. After your exposure time is complete, remove the exposure unit or light source and use a biro or pen to mark the position of the black card which covered your design for the first portion of your exposure. Once it's been marked, slide the card down a small section and repeat the process. Once you've finished making your test exposure, you need to label the amount of time for which each section was exposed. The last section which is exposed has only had exposure to the UV light for 4 minutes, so I'll label this with a 4. Each following section had an additional 4 minutes, so I've labelled these up to 32 minutes. Now I need to rinse out my screen and find my ideal exposure time. After you've washed out your screen, it's time to check for your ideal exposure time. Down here at the bottom of my screen, where it hasn't had very long exposing under the UV lights, you'll see that the emulsion is washing away and that the definition has been lost from the stencil. Up here at the top of my screen, there are certain sections with fine detail where the emulsion hasn't washed away completely. This means it's overexposed. My ideal exposure point is going to be somewhere in the middle of these 2 points, around here. I haven't lost any definition at the edges through underexposure, but I also haven't lost some of the design details through overexposure. My ideal exposure time for my exposure unit today with this stencil is about 24 minutes. Once you've found your ideal exposure time, you'll need to either rinse out this screen completely with a decoating agent or have a second screen prepared, ready to expose your final stencil. To make your final screens, you need to set up a piece of black card, a prepared screen, your acetate design and an acrylic sheet to keep everything flat during the exposure process. Everything goes into your exposure unit and you'll expose for the time that you've discovered from your test strip is the correct exposure time for your screen and your design. After the exposure time is complete, turn off your unit and reveal your screen. Once you remove the acetate sheet, you should be able to clearly see your design marked in a different colour on your screen. It's now ready to wash out. Once you've completely washed out your screen and your design is clear, it's time to mask the edges of the screen to prevent any ink bleed through during the printing process. Once you've masked all the way around the edge of your frame, you're ready to start printing. The first print that I'll be making with my screen is going to be on card, so I'll be using some watercolour screen printing ink. I lay my screen onto the card surface and position it where I like, and then lay a thick layer of screen printing ink along the top of the screen. Next, I use a squeegee to draw the ink down the screen in one fluid motion. When you lift the screen away, your print will be revealed. For printing on fabric, the process is exactly the same. We just need to use a slightly different ink, which is especially designed for textiles. Your screen can be washed out with water or screen wash and can be used multiple times to create the same design on as many surfaces as you like. Make sure that when your screen is not in use, it's stored in a dark environment, as the emulsion on the screen is reactive to UV light, and exposure to daylight and overhead lighting will cause the emulsion to continue to react until eventually it may be impossible to remove from the screen. Making a repeat print is a great way to personalise items, whether it's for yourself, for promotional materials, or to sell at craft fairs.